Stephen Greer with the Orion Project and the Disclosure Project. I'm joined on the call by Dr. Ted Loader, who is the science advisor for our project. Ted, welcome.
Thank you very much, Steve. Pleasure to be here.
Well, we are going to be talking about the OrionProject.org, and I encourage everyone to go to that website as they're listening now. And the OrionProject.org is a nonprofit that is working to fund promising innovations in energy technology that are the real out-of-the-box solutions that we know are going to solve the global energy and environmental crisis. And today we're going to be talking about some developments with the OrionProject.org, having identified almost 10 months ago now or so the existence of the famous Stan Meyer water-to-fuel technology and its location after the death of Stan Meyer. And we are going to be talking about how we are working to acquire this technology as it has now passed on to a group of people who are wanting to basically have another group take it on and develop it further. And the Orion Project is one of the top couple of people in the process of bidding to acquire these systems. So, Ted, I wonder if you would like to just do a layman's version of a technical summary of what Stan Meyer's technology was reported to be doing and why it'd be so important.
I'll be glad to. Just a touch of a background. We were contacted back late last year, December, January period, about this technology, and I spent some time actually visiting and seeing it. And there's many different technologies that Stan Meyer had. The basic fundamental technology that he developed was one in which one can take a cylinder or a device which holds water with some essentially electrodes in it, and by putting various voltages across the water, or across the electrode, it breaks down the water into hydrogen and oxygen. After all, water is H2O, 2 hydrogens for every oxygen. So you end up with a gas, and what you end up is a mixed gas, a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen. The way this technology is set up, it doesn't separate the two. It keeps them as a mixture. Now, what Stan Meyer did was that he developed a way in which using resonance technology, in which you essentially vibrate the water molecule apart by putting in very, very short pulses of various voltages across the electrodes, he was able to break down the water with much less electricity than what might be termed the brute force method, originally discovered and worked on by Michael Faraday back in the 1800s, known as sort of Faraday's constant of how much energy it takes to break the water apart. Well, Stan Meyer figured out how to do that by essentially shaking the water molecule apart instead of just sort of electrically pulling it apart. And it takes much, much less energy to do that. And visualize, if you will, the old example of a resonance as a swing, in which a little child is on a swing, and at the right time of the swing, you just give that swing just a little bit of a push as the parent or the friend doing it, and the swing keeps going higher and higher, and yet you aren't really lifting that person up that high. You're just giving a little push at the right moment in a pendulum. Well, this is sort of an electronic pendulum or resonance sort of system in which the electrical circuits give a pulse or a push, if you will, to the water molecules, and they just literally shake apart. And what that means is that if you have the proper circuitry, such as he developed, and others are working on, if you have the proper circuitry, you can then essentially break the water apart and produce a gas, sometimes known as Brown's gas or hydroxy gas, that can then burn, and it ends up giving out more energy. This is the hard part to believe, but it's been demonstrated. It gives out more energy in the burning than you needed to break the water molecule apart to get the gas or the mixture of the gas. And that's a very, very powerful set of circumstances, because it means that If you break the water apart using just a little bit of energy, you then burn the gas or inject it into an internal combustion engine, either as an additive to gasoline to enhance the fuel, the mileage, and increase the burning, or as just a pure gas that then burns within the internal combustion engine, and use the generator or alternator to then produce more of this gas. You can literally have excess energy produced by the generator that then you can use for some other purpose. So this is an incredibly powerful technology.
Right, and what we're wanting to do is to set it up as a system to create a generator that would, for example, take the wastewater from a home, because every home uses about 400 gallons of water a day average in America. Most of it is from showers and sinks and not sewage. And take that water and run a generator that would create, that would be an electric generator that would run the needs of the home and also create enough electricity to run the electrolysis process, the Stan Meyer type electrolysis process, so that you basically have a closed system. The only exhaust from such a system, by the way, whether it's a motor for a car or a generator for your home, is water vapor, which can go back through a condenser to make more water to supply the system. So there's potentially a lot of energy, of course, in water, but the trick has been getting an electronic system, as Ted just mentioned, that is, in a sense, over unity. In other words, where you would get more energy out than you have to put in, which has not been the case. Usually you have to put enormous amounts of electricity in to get a certain volume of Brown's gas, and it's not enough to run a load or, say, a home and also run the system. In fact, it's not even enough to run the system. And the magic here, and Ted used a good analogy about a swing, but you can also look at it as like the sound vibration when you hear people at a certain tone being able to break a wine glass or a crystal glass, or you've seen those pictures of that bridge that when it got into a certain resonant phase began swinging, and I think it was in the 30s, and all the cars where they were going back and forth, and eventually it fell apart because of the resonance wave going through it. So there are ways to do this that multiply the effect of the normal brute force electric current that has to be used, and that's what apparently Stan Meyer and his brother, twin brother Steve, developed. In fact, we've recently had someone who has surfaced who has confirmed to us that at the time of Stan Meyer's death, and I have acquired his coroner's report, which is very interesting in and of itself. We can talk about that in a minute. He was working on a system and had successfully developed a system, apparently with the CIA, having a jet that was running on this system so that it was using this type of hydrogen and oxygen gas on demand, presumably with some additive to the water so it wouldn't freeze at altitudes, and this was being test flown somewhere in Kansas. There are two people now that have reported to us that this is what he was up to, and it also is interesting in the coroner's report for Stan Meyer. It states that it was reported that at the time of his death, he was having a meeting at a Cracker Barrel in Ohio with NATO officials discussing his technology, and they were making a toast with some cranberry juice, as so it said in the coroner's report. I have the official coroner's report now, and that Stan Meyer jumped up and grabbed his throat, saying he had been poisoned, and ran out into the parking lot at midday or so, and collapsed and died, and was pretty much dead on arrival. The report says that he had a cerebral aneurysm, but interestingly, what he experienced was that he thought he had been instantly poisoned. Now, we do not know exactly why Stan Meyer died, but it was under strange and rather sudden circumstances, and we have very good reason to believe this technology is something that is quite advanced and needs to be further developed so that we can transition out of oil and gas and coal to very clean use of the sort of excess water that people use in their daily lives. And I think that, of course, the potential for this is great because, there are a billion vehicles on the road that run on gasoline that could be converted to run on hydrogen and this oxygen-hydrogen mixture, and also a lot of power generating facilities that could be converted to run on this system. And you would have an enormous benefit to greenhouse gas reduction and pollution and our dependency on imported oil and the whole geopolitical mess that's created in the Middle East. So, obviously such a technology would have an enormous effect in addition to what we're working on with electromagnetic generator systems that would also be complete replacement systems. So we call these systems, like what Stan Meyer had, as transitional technologies because they help us use the current motors and things that are out there, but transition to make them run on very clean burning hydrogen and oxygen instead of running on oil and gas.
Which also means that the hospital that has to keep several thousand gallons of fuel oil on duty, if you will, all the time for their emergency backup diesel system could be using water as the backup, and so they aren't investing who knows how many thousands of dollars in just fuel oil that has to sit there for an emergency. So there's a lot of different levels of very powerful economic implications of this.
Well, yes, and of course, if it's an over unity system that's basically so-called free energy as opposed to very costly energy, the Earth is 2/3 covered with water. There's no shortage of water on the planet. And we have spoken to people, one man who had worked in a classified project at General Motors, where they could do this with salt water, they could do it with polluted, muddy Mississippi water, and it was a matter of having filters in place and also changing the resonant frequency of the signal that would go into the water, depending on whether it was pure water and distilled water or water that had minerals and salts or pollution in it. The point being that this is a technology that has never been developed fully, that we are working, and what people need to do is go to the Orion Project, all one word, .org, and make a contribution to us, because we are in the process of trying to purchase this entire inventory of all of Stan Meyer's electronics and equipment so that they can get going again and we can study them and then build a study team around it of researchers and scientists who understand this type of physics so that we can eventually come out with some kind of practical solutions that would be using clean sources of energy to convert the existing internal combustion oil and gas and coal-based systems to these very clean systems, and while we're developing these other type of systems that are the electromagnetic free energy generators. So that's a really big project. We're hoping in the next month or so we will hear if we are able to acquire this. It's going to be fairly expensive to set up a team of people, not only to acquire it, but to also set up a team of scientists to study it. And we're happy that at this point we have about $210,000 in the Orion project out of our goal of $3.1 million. But we need more people who are listening to the World Puja Network to share with others that this is an ongoing acquisition bidding process, and we really need their support so we can stay in the running and get this technology so it doesn't disappear into some black hole again. I mean, Stan Meyer passed away 12 years ago, and this has all been laying dormant for 12 years at its surface now, and we feel it needs to be rescued from oblivion, and our team is the best qualified team to get it and develop it.
Well, I think so too, and I just as an aside, you mentioned that we plan to bring a team together to then research the technology of Stan Meyer technology, and the interesting thing is that over the last several years, there's been a number of groups around the country, individuals as well as groups, who have been studying this technology and trying to reproduce it, and really having some trouble with getting to the over unity. I mean, almost anybody, a ninth grade science student, can make bubbles in water with a battery and some electrodes and produce the gas. but to be able to do it in a highly efficient manner is the real trick and the issue. So there have been a number of groups working on this, but talking to several of these inventors is that they've studied Stan's patents and studied the technology, but they haven't quite figured it out. And one fellow that who's been studying this stuff for several years now and is really an expert on it, says all I need to do is see his technology, the real thing, for 5 minutes, and he said, I understand all the circuits, but there's something missing, or he can't quite figure out what's going on in the patent. So we have, and he's very excited about working with us, and I literally spent time today for a half hour talking to another researcher from the West Coast who is working in this area and would be very excited to work with us in terms of researching the technology once we have it, with his own knowledge to sort of do a leap forward in bringing this technology out. So there's a lot of excitement among the researchers in this area about bringing this technology out.
Well, I think the other thing is that it has to be done not only from a technical point of view, but from a strategic point of view. The reason we're involving the public on the World Puja Network and elsewhere with this is that one of the mistakes that Stan Meyer had made is that it had not gotten out to enough millions of people that he had this to put a zone of protection around him so that there would not be a loss of the knowledge. And many people believe that Stan Meyer was murdered in the course of trying to do this. It's likely that is what happened. I think that the problem is when you look at the history of these new energy developments, the suppression around it has been formidable. And the only way you're going to get around that is to do it very openly and do it with lots of people supporting it and millions, and if not hundreds of millions of people aware of the breakthrough when it occurs, so that basically the toothpaste is squeezed out of the tube very quickly and you can't put it back in. I think that one of the problems with this whole area of research is that it's been done much too quietly, and we need to get the public involved, and the only way that we know to do that is by talking to folks like at the World Puja Network and saying, hey, we need your networking, and everyone listening needs to tell everyone on their email list to go to theorionproject.org and learn about this. We have a whole section up there about our project to acquire the Stan Meyer technology and these systems that are related to it, and then make a generous donation so that we will have enough funding in place to put a team around this technology and develop it further. And this is something that, you look at the kind of numbers that are being tossed around in the presidential campaign where people are talking about spending $30 billion to do things with developing coal technology, which, by the way, I was just reading in the Sierra News, a club for this Virginia area, that in Appalachia they're doing what's called MTL, which is mountaintop removal to mine, and they're just blowing up the tops of mountains and then dumping all the waste into streams and into the valleys to get to the coal, and that this has become the cheapest and most effective way, and they're literally blowing up Appalachia and the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains to be able to expose the veins of coal so that they can do this. And then they're talking about liquefying coal to fuel, and it turns out it takes a ton of coal that's been extricated from the earth in these very earth-destroying ways to create 1 barrel of oil, a ton.
Oh, my gosh.
So, we're talking about an environmental holocaust going on today, right now as we speak, that's completely unnecessary. And it's going to take something way outside the box of what our political establishment leadership and even what Al Gore is suggesting, that we're going to have to move into these really sophisticated areas of physics that have been kept secret and suppressed for so long because, tinkering around with a few solar panels and windmills ain't going to do it. And, I've looked into, for example, converting my home so that all its heating and cooling and other costs would be met by wind and solar, and the price tag is upwards of $100,000. Well, the average person in America can't spend $100,000 just to put in an energy generation system. And in order to really move out of this carbon-based, earth-destroying, cannibalistic way that we're living on the planet and live in a way that is in harmony with Gaia and in harmony with our sustainable future, we're going to really have to start thinking outside the box. We're going to have to move way beyond the politics of, drilling more holes in the ground for oil and blowing up all the mountaintops in Appalachia to get to the low-so for coal, and spending $30 billion of the taxpayers' money to do so. I think we're going to have to really begin to step forward. And what I say to people is, it's a crime against humanity, quite frankly, that these sort of new energy researchers have never been able to receive any funding when we have billions and tens of billions that have been wasted as money going to the oil industry, the coal industry, the nuclear industry, the Department of Energy, and yet we're here trying to raise only $3.1 million to support all these scientists and brilliant people we have identified who are credentialed and brilliant scientists who can't get funding through the conventional source. And that's why we're turning to people at the World Puja Network and say, look, we need the people who are listening to this show to network to their friends and family and colleagues and say, look, this is some really promising developments, and we need people to donate generously to that fund, which is a nonprofit and foundation, and so that we can make grants to support this kind of research and solve these energy problems in a way that's effective. Because, quite frankly, what's being suggested in terms of alternative energy right now, in my opinion, is pseudo-alternative energy. It is simply too little, too late, and way too expensive, and there are other ways of doing it. I mean, it's nothing wrong with going on with solar and wind in the meanwhile, but I think that what we really need to have a discussion about is what else is there? What else is there besides spending trillions of dollars on these other systems? Perhaps these technologies that we can prove have existed in the past and that have been actively suppressed by the powers that be are where the real promise is and where the real payoff will be. And recently I was listening to Thomas Friedman of the New York Times, who was talking about how we needed 100,000 people who are working in their basements and in their garages working with really innovative new technologies for energy generation, that maybe one or two of them would come up with something that's really revolutionary. Well, I have news for Thomas Friedman. Yeah, people have, and it's been around for 100 years, since the early 1900s. But what has to happen is that we have to get those systems developed and put them into a strategic plan that gets the support of the masses of people so that they don't get suppressed. I recently had a member of Congress who's a committee chair in the United States Congress, has a friend who called us, and this congressman and I have met several times, and this person called and said that when they had been with the Department of Energy, had been taken into a facility at near Oak Ridge National Laboratories, and went into a facility where there were dozens, if not hundreds, of these types of energy-generating breakthrough technologies that were in a secret facility and were in quote, hiding, that they were being held back. So you have one end of our military and industrial and laboratory complex sitting on these solutions, while the debate in the public is going on about spending $30 billion to have coal be cleaned up, which is ridiculous when we haven't needed to burn coal for 100 years.
This is why it's a crime against humanity.
Well, it's a crime against humanity. It's a crime against future generations of humans,
yeah, absolutely,
and a crime against Earth, which is a living, conscious being, Gaia. So I think that if we're really going to fix this problem, we're going to have to really think of these creative solutions and put our efforts and our work and our money where our mouth is. And we know that this can be done, and the people need to go to theorionproject.org, learn about these issues, make a contribution that's generous, and let their friends and family and colleagues know about it. Another thing I wanted to share, and I think this is something that we can just touch on at this point, is that we are working with some scientists who are in a foreign country who apparently have developed, and this is quite separate from the Stan Meyer technology, a solid state, more than 1 kilowatt electronic system for creating energy from the quantum vacuum, from the space around us, the so-called zero-point energy field, or quantum vacuum flux field. And we are hoping that very soon we will be meeting with these scientists and beginning the first level of testing of their system, which apparently is at a 2 kilowatt level and can be scaled up to tens or hundreds of kilowatts. It is a completely solid-state system. Apparently, nothing really moving in it in terms of the energy generation.
Again, the concept of resonance plays a role in it.
Oh, it is. It's a resonant system that takes the so-called electromagnetic flux field that's all around us. And one of the things I point out to people, it's been estimated that every cubic centimeter of space around us has enough energy to run the Earth for a day if you could tap into that potential energy. And it's virtually an infinite sea of energy that's at the base level of within the fabric of space-time around us. And I think that these really advanced systems, which we know have existed in the past and know people who have worked on them in classified projects, we now have identified some scientists who say they have this breakthrough, and we will be investigating that, and people at the World Puja Network should stay tuned for emerging and perhaps emergent and urgent announcements about this in the coming weeks.
Yes, very exciting, and we have our proverbial fingers crossed that it is indeed what they said. We've met over the years. We've met with numerous inventors who have had claims about their devices, shall we say, which turned out to be, upon very serious professional testing, if you will, turned out to be false claims. Either the inventors mismeasured something, or didn't measure it correctly, or just misinterpreted the data. So we really, any device or any technology that we look at will have to go through a whole series of vetting and analysis, and very careful by multiple groups before we totally will announce that this technology exists.
That's right, and our requirement is that they be tested by us initially in-house, and then we have a confirmatory test by outside engineers who are electronics and electromagnetic specialist engineers. And then once we can reproduce the effect and make a copy of the device, it will then go on a confirmatory testing tour where it will be taken to certain universities and laboratories that we've identified for confirming the effect, so that there is an objective test that can then be put up on our website that would confirm not only what the inventor has found, but what we have found, but can then be confirmed by prestigious institutions and universities that will also do a follow-on test. So this is all part of the protocol, and it's a very rigorous one, and we are hoping that we will begin that process soon with these new inventors that have surfaced in the last.
I might add that process of testing requires several weeks to a month or two to go through all the steps in the process. Now hopefully, and some kinds of testing is much simpler, much easier to do than others. It depends upon the technology.
Well, one of the things that we have required, and if people go to the orionproject.org or arrow2012.com, you'll see our criteria for these technologies, and that is that they be closed loop and self-running and can power a load of about 1 kilowatt or more. And what that means is that if you have, for example, a small battery that starts the system up, that battery stays charged. And if you run the machine and run 1 kilowatt of appliances, say, light bulbs and fans and computers or whatever it is, that at the end of however many hours or days, that the battery stays completely charged, the system has self-run, and it's been running a load, doing some kind of work in the real world. So now, allegedly, that's what this new set of inventors claim to have, and if they do, it's a very, very, very big breakthrough, and we will let everyone know. But that is exactly what the criteria is, and that actually makes the test pretty simple, because if it's not plugged into the grid and the startup energy supply power pack stays fully charged, then and it runs a load way beyond the ability of say, the battery pack. Let's say you have a small 5-amp battery that can only run a 200-watt load for 5 minutes. If that control test shows that, but you have this system running for hours or days, running a kilowatt or two, and the battery pack stays fully charged, you have an enormous breakthrough, which is really quite simple to validate. And, of course, now the physics behind what's going on is not simple, because you're dealing with this resonant field technology that's tapping into the zero-point energy field, or the quantum vacuum flux field, as some people call it, that's all around us in space. But nevertheless, that's exactly what we're looking for with people who have technologies with these claims, and so we're hopeful that these inventors have this, and there are other people who have surfaced who are working on similar systems. And this is exactly why we also want to put a campus together, a research and development facility, where not only the Stan Meyer technology can be researched, but all these other types of inventors and researchers who are experimenting with these advanced concepts in physics and energy generation can be put together under one roof and can share ideas and can work together, because in doing so, what you find is that somebody might get to a certain point in development and hit a brick wall, but another person would have the skill or the knowledge to get around that obstacle. And unfortunately, there's no university or government program in the non-classified world working on this. And what it means is that a lot of these inventors and scientists who work on these sort of technologies have done so as sort of lone wolves or isolated individuals. And that has really limited, I think, the potential of this area of science, which has been ignored for so many years.
Very much so. We've continually talked to new inventors, and over the last 10, 15 years or more, we've talked to literally hundreds of inventors around the country and around the world. And almost universally, they work by themselves. It's only actually in recent years that some have been talking to each other. And it's really becomes obvious as we talk to them that they really need to talk to Dr. X over here or Dr. Y over there to get solve the few little problems they have remaining. And having a campus with a research facility with people there on a daily basis with facilities to support them will be just a major step forward and collapse time frames in developing some of this technology, because we'll have the people there who can solve different problems. One fellow talked to us who's a brilliant mechanical engineer, said, I just can't do electronics, but his mechanical engineering ideas were just brilliant. And this is, not everybody can do everything. In fact, very few people can do everything.
Right, and I think that's the other point, is that not only would the synergy create a situation where there would be significant breakthroughs very quickly, because much of this has been researched, albeit clandestinely or in classified projects for decades, and we know people who have worked in those sort of classified projects who know this science, who can come in as consultants. But we also know that there is a certain safety in numbers, as we did with the Disclosure Project. If you go to disclosureproject.org, you'll see what we did, where we combined dozens of top-secret military and corporate and intelligence witnesses who came forward on the so-called UFO issue. I think you'll find that there is a certain security in working together, and the old adage, God loves those who work together, is really true here, because there is a level of protection. And I think the other part of it is through networks like the World Fusion Network of having millions of people know about these breakthroughs in real time as they're occurring, where they're involved and they're stakeholders, in a sense, of this, because we're all living on this planet that's in incredible trouble right now, not just financially and geopolitically, but existentially, environmentally. The very existence of our civilization on this planet is being threatened by the way we're living on the planet, that I think there are so many people who understand that now, and that they will need to step forward really as proponents and defenders of what we're doing. And I think that's why we feel it's very important early to involve lots of people, thousands of people. And by the way, you can go to the orionproject.org and sign up for our weekly or biweekly newsletters and announcements that we send out, and to get updates, and also to be on our priority mailing list, so that as soon as we have a major breakthrough, such as the ones we've been discussing with the Stanmeyer water-to-fuel technology or the solid-to-state electromagnetic generators, that you will be one of the first people on the planet to know. And the way to be one of those people is to go to theorionproject.org. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe to this list, and we encourage people to do that so that they will be made aware as soon as there are breaking developments, and then can share that with your own network. And that not only gets the word out and lights up the whole network through the internet, but also, in doing so, provides the support and the protection that we need to be able to proceed.
Absolutely, and we're continually. We've started a program the last month or so to send out the newsletters on the weekly to biweekly basis, depending on what our team is doing and what's going on, to let people know what's happening. And so that's all you have to do is sign up for it. It's a very easy thing to do, and the newsletters are basically short and try to focus on one topic just to let you know what's happening. So,
right, and for example, we've been sending out newsletters to let people know what's developing with this Stanmeyer technology. The people who inherited his equipment are now wanting it to be given to a group that can take it forward. And as I mentioned, we're one of maybe 2 or 3 groups that are being considered. It's not known yet exactly how costly the acquisition of these systems and all the equipment, and of course Stanmeyer actually had a car running on water at one point, but of course all of this equipment has been sitting for 12 years, has to be kind of resurrected from the dust and studied and made to be operational, and if it's operational as he had claimed, be studied to see exactly what the circuits are that have made it operational. So it'll be a rather involved R&D project, but we think it's worth it because if he has the breakthroughs that we think he has, what that could enable us to do is to really shorten the timeline to get some kind of functioning product developed that could then be announced, that could be made available to the world, that would replace gasoline and oil and other noxious forms of combustion, and so that water, that when you break it into hydrogen and oxygen, H2O, basically just emits water vapor, which again can be captured to be made into the tank and put back into the tank for more water. So I think that one of the things that has to happen is developing this as a study group, but then developing some kind of operational system that is efficient and robust and self-running, that could be put into application. And what an amazing world it would be if suddenly there was a way to have a kit where people's automobiles, for example, instead of your gas tank being filled with gasoline, could be filled with water, or your home, instead of being tied into a coal-fired or nuclear or what have you power grid, could be running on a small amount of the excess wastewater that you use routinely for your showers and washing dishes. I mean, there's no shortage of water in that sense. And the whole way that we're living on the planet would begin to change very quickly once these technologies come out. But of course, that's the Achilles heel of the whole thing, is that because such a technology, and I'm sure this is why the NATO military folks and the CIA were meeting with Stan Meyer prior to his death, is that it's not lost on these folks that the current world order, that's a very centralized economic and geopolitical financial system, a geoeconomic system that is based on a centralized energy supply line, whether it be public utilities or ExxonMobil or oil fields or what have you, that would, such a development, such as what Stan Meyer had, or these solid-state electromagnetic generators that these inventors that we're discussing, working with, and who we hope to be meeting with very soon, claim to have, that these would be a game changer. We're talking the mother of all game changers, and it would have a multi-trillion-dollar impact on the current system. But it would also be the tide that would lift all ships, because the majority of the world's population is greatly underdeveloped, living in terrible poverty, and the have and have-nots, the gap between them is growing every year, not shrinking. And to the extent that there's been a little bit of growth in China and India of a middle class who now wants to drive cars and have electricity, it is causing a doubling of greenhouse gases. China now exceeds the United States for the creation of greenhouse gases and pollution, and are putting 1 to 2 coal-fired power plants on each week, which don't have scrubbers and are dumping all this pollution. In fact, about 15% of the pollution in the Bay Area of San Francisco is from China coming across the Pacific and being dumped into the air and settling there in the San Francisco Bay Area.
I hadn't heard that, and that's not surprising.
And yes, that's
a global problem
reported by the environmental protection and scientific groups. And so I think that what people have to understand, it really are a little planet here floating through space, and there are limited, there's a limit to how much of this kind of degradation of the environment can happen. And let's not forget that basically the technologies that China and India and even the West are using were developed between 1850 and 1900. I mean, even the automobile engine was developed by Mercedes in the late 1800s. Coal-fired power and steam was earlier in the 1800s. It's really time to move on. I mean, I think of this, moveon.org, but this is really moving on. We've really got to move on off of this cannibalistic and earth-destroying stupidity that has kept us locked into a fossil fuel-dependent, centralized energy and economic system, which has really resulted in global economic slavery, poverty around the world, geopolitical wars, and Middle East instability, as well as, of course, the obvious damage to the environment. And this is all fixable, but it isn't going to be done by drilling a few more holes in the ground or blowing up all the mountaintops in Appalachia to get to this veins of coal that are near the surface. We're going to really have to rethink how we live on this planet, and I think that while it's a great idea to put in windmills and solar panels, they're highly expensive for the amount of energy they generate, and China and India aren't going to do it. And the reason they're not is that they feel it's their turn to industrialize and have a middle-class existence and live with some degree of electricity and automobiles and air conditioning and refrigeration, etc. And, that's why they're not opting into these programs that are dealing with global warming and are resisting to do that, because they feel like the West, Europe and America, has had 150 years to develop, and it's now their turn. So you have 2.5 billion people who want to have their turn, but they're having their turn with 150 to 100-year-old technologies that are very destructive and should have been retired several decades ago. So it's time for us to really get serious about these issues, think about them deeply, and then make some commitment. And that's what I'm asking everyone who's listening to make a serious commitment to clean energy, free energy, and advancing these technological research programs so that it can happen within a year or two or three and not 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, I'd like to add a second request to that is that one of the concerns I've had in listening to the presidential candidates, both sides of the present coin, if you will, Republicans and Democrats, is neither one of them have a future-looking energy program. And if any of you out there listening to this know people who are either in either one of the campaigns and can tell them about the Orion Project, what we're doing with alternative energies, and try to get that information to the candidates so they can talk about putting some of their energy plan into research to bring out these new technologies. Because getting outside-the-box technologies, if we want to call it that, or these new technologies, zero-point energy technologies or whatever, or the transitional technologies, are the only way we're going to get out of our present environmental and economic and political conundrum. That's the only way we're going to get out of that, and right now our presidential candidates are not speaking about that. They are speaking about same old, nuclear, oil drilling, and coal with a little bit of solar and wind thrown in so they sound as though they are forward-looking. Anyway, that's a thought. If anybody of you know people who are in those campaigns and wish to let them know about this, and if they show more interest, they can either contact Dr. Greer or myself through the website, and we'd be glad to speak with them and try to explain what we're doing and what the potentials are if they could just put a little bit of energy and effort into that development. Thank you.
Yes, I think that's a very good suggestion, and I think the other thing is to if there are town hall meetings where energy comes up, that some people stand up and say, well, have you heard of the OrionProject.org? And are you aware of these other types of advanced breakthroughs in physics? And begin to put it on the radar scope. I mean, if you're going to be in a participatory democracy, then you need to participate. Certainly I have met with people in the U.S. Congress, and these things have been discussed. I have not met with McCain or Obama, but I will say that there has always been a lot of interest. The problem is most of them don't want to take any public stand on this because it's in a very, very controversial area. And I think that it's a little bit like when we were doing briefings for President Clinton and Al Gore when they were president and vice president, and they were very interested, but they didn't want to do anything about it. And it's a matter of courage, and I think that the public needs to hold these leaders of our country and other countries as well, and in Canada and Europe, feet to the fire and say, look, very prestigious journals such as Jane's Defense Weekly had an article by Nick Pope, and who was a writer and is a writer for them, and where he discusses and he ended up writing a book called The Race to Zero Point, I believe it's called, where he talks about the fact that in the 40s and 50s, these advanced concepts were being looked at, and that they all went kind of black and disappeared in 1954. In fact, I'm working with a senior scientist in the Department of Defense right now who has documented that it was 1954 that these technologies became classified and became very secret, and that our taxpayer dollars have been used to empower a system that have suppressed these sort of solutions on the one hand, while on the other hand, our leaders who don't know about it have been calling for some kind of way to become energy independent and fix the environment. It's an absurd situation that has to be addressed and has to be fixed.
Steve, just a quick comment. That was Nick Cook, not Nick Pope.
Yeah, Nick Cook. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to insert.
Right, and I recommend that book to people, The Race to Zero.
Oh yeah, it's very interesting.
And I think it's a very important thing that someone of this sort of development would have someone with a prestigious defense industry resume. And Jane's Defense Weekly in Britain is one of the most prestigious defense journals, would have this. I also point out that in France there have been significant developments along similar lines. I recently got an aerospace journal, a copy of an aerospace journal, where the whole question of these advanced aircraft and the so-called UFO issue was being openly discussed. And that was as of a couple of months ago. And then, of course, I don't read French, but a friend of mine attached an informal translation, and it was quite a good treatment of the subject. And so, somehow these things are beginning to be dealt with quite openly on the other side of the Atlantic, but you don't hear about it a whole lot in the United States establishment. And I think that the public and the people listening to the World Fusion Network need to write their political leaders and people that they know who may be associated with these campaigns and begin asking these tough questions and say, look, everyone is talking about energy and the environment, but there's an area that's not being discussed at all that deals with these very advanced areas of physics and science that have been, unfortunately, kept away from the public for 50 years or longer, and that this is something that needs to begin to get discussed.
Absolutely, and I guess that it's one of these things where everybody's going to have to do their part to sort of educate other people that maybe you don't understand the technology, and most people don't understand the technology. Just understanding the issue that there are some potential technologies out there that with just a few $1 million could be brought to a breakthrough level, so that people will become aware that there are some alternatives to our present oil, gas, nuclear paradigm. And that alone is a major breakthrough, that people become aware that there are some options and alternatives to where we are today. Very important change of direction can happen then.
Correct. That's absolutely correct, and I think that's why we're calling on everyone to help us with this effort. And again, to go to the orionproject.org and look at the information we have. There's an enormous amount of historical and technical information there for those who want to read that, and also what our plans are and how you can get involved. For example, we recently had a gentleman in Australia had sort of a walkathon for the Orion Project and raised about $1,200 or $1,400 for our research grant program by doing that, and also in the process educated a lot of people about these issues. And so I think that on the grassroots level, people can do a great deal if they learn about it and then take some action and share the information with people who are in their network and on their email list and what have you. And that's what we're asking folks to do. And we really need that support at this point because we have these breaking technology developments with the Stan Meyer technology, acquiring the water-to-fuel systems from that group, as well as these other scientists who are coming forward. And I think we have to really begin to see how it is that we can come together and provide the support needed. One of the things that strikes me as I study this issue and see what's happened over the last 100 years or so is that a lot of these developments have been taken into either corporate or government programs and been suppressed, or they have simply withered on the vine and died. I mean, if you look at what happened to Stan Meyer's technology, there was never a groundswell of knowledge and support around it. It was always greatly underfunded and done very much on a shoestring, with very limited funding for development, and ultimately, about the time that it was going to emerge, it vanished until now. And this is a pattern that has been going on for 100 years. Literally, we have photos on the website of Nikola Tesla with a man named Stubblefield, who had developed an Earth battery that would generate energy, electromagnetic electricity, real energy, from the resonant field of the Earth. And in fact, Dr. Loader and I saw such a system on an island in the Caribbean about 5 or 6 years ago that was really quite impressive, although it was rudimentary, although the inventor ultimately became, I think, intimidated about coming forward and never transferred that information to us. But, I mean, it was a very simple system. It had 6 zinc and copper stakes in the ground, and then went into a homemade generator system that had transistors and tiny capacitors, and
again, used a resonance-type system.
It was a resonant-type system, and it was putting out 400 or so watts of free energy, and we were sitting there, had a power strip, plugging fans and stereos and lights and everything into it. I mean, it was astonishing. So and of course, you look all the way back to 1908, and there are photographs and descriptions of Nikola Tesla standing there with this kind of home-taught engineer who was a farmer, actually, named Stubblefield. Mm-hmm. And that information is up on our website. And so, we know this is possible, but for us to be able to put a team of people together to experiment with these systems and make something really strong and robust that would run your home, we need to be able to have at least a laboratory and a research facility. And that's why we have this really extremely modest budget of $3.1 million, which I have to point out is about half the cost of the funds raised for my rural county here in Virginia for the recently opened dog and cat shelter, which was over $6 million. So I think that this issue is worth at least what one dog and cat shelter is worth in one rural county in Virginia. And so I think that, and there's enough evidence that this is not an urban myth, that these sciences exist. And so we really want people to step forward and understand that there is enormous promise and hope for humanity and for the environment, but we're going to have to come together and really get into a more active mode of supporting these sort of research scientists and out-of-the-box thinkers, because that's always where the big breakthroughs have come from, in my opinion. And it's rare that they come out of the corporate world or the government laboratories. They usually come out of left field. And I think the energy solutions will be no different. And this is why we need to get these sort of really creative physicists and engineers supported, and we need to do it now.
Absolutely. And to support what Dr. Greer is saying, any support that you can give us or to help the project is more than welcome, including the support of letting politicians and other people know about the reality. The more people know about it, the more possibility there is of some breakthroughs from the political realm as well. Well,
yes, that's right, and it's all about networking. There may be someone listening right now on the World Puja Network who knows someone who is a high net worth individual or someone who is with a environmental foundation that they could network us to and could help get this funding in place very quickly. And so we're asking people to think about who they know, and it's all, of course, however many degrees of separation, but everyone's probably 2 or 3 degrees separated from someone who could, if they could get educated on this issue and see the data and see the evidence and the historical record, could actually make this happen. So that's another area. Not only can people make their own contribution from whatever they can, but they can network this to folks, because I think that networking is really key, and that's what we need your help with. And we appreciate any help all of you listening at the good folks at the World Puja Network can give us. So I think we're about out of time, and I would like to thank Dr. Ted Loader for joining me with this discussion.